What can France learn from 6 weeks of lockdown? Well, for one, it's very different depending on where you live. Hello, everyone. I'm François Picard. Welcome to the France 24 debate. While Paris hits the pause button and lovers of the City of Light can appreciate at a distance the eerie aesthetics of empty streets, others, well, still have to get to work. North of the capital is the densely populated working class suburbs of Saint-Denis, where live many essential workers, hospital care employees, transport workers, cleaners, caterers. But if you live there, you're much more likely to be fined by police for breaking confinement rules. The Banlieues flared up anew last week when police in the nearby working class suburb of Villeneuve-la-Garenne knocked over a 30-year-old who they were trying to stop for riding his motorbike without a helmet. He's appealed for calm, but is also suing the police. We'll have more on that with our panel. And how to turn the hardship of confinement in ghettos into perhaps an opportunity. The French President Emmanuel Macron himself, in a recent address to the nation, acknowledged that the accentuated inequality laid bare by the coronavirus pandemic has sparked him to appeal for the building of, quote, new types of solidarity. That's why the government, for instance, is pushing to reopen schools for those left behind by online learning or who can't afford to stay home with the kids. But what more is needed if France is to truly address inherent inequality? Today in the France 24 debate, we're looking at coronavirus and the French banlieue. With us to talk about it is Madjid, Messaoudene, City Councillor for the northern Paris suburb of Saint-Denis. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me. Thank you.
And we're also pleased to welcome, she is the founder of Get Up. Ines Siddiqui is with us. Ines, tell us what Get Up is.
Thank you for having me. So Get Up is an organization that works in the Seine-Saint-Denis mostly to empower the youth from the banlieue. The main goal is to help them understand that they have a seat at the table waiting for them somewhere. So we try and empower them and give them the tools, the networks, and the opportunities to fulfill their professional potentials, but also citizen potentials and involve in society and try and resolve the issues they face.
All right, and you're speaking to us from the northern Paris suburb of Stains, with us from across the channel today, but he knows the Paris suburbs well for having taught high school there and having done so much field work there. The author of Radicalized Loyalty, sociologist Fabien Truong, who teaches at the University of Paris at Saint-Denis, is with us. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
The France 24 debate on Facebook and Twitter. The hashtag is F24debate. Madjid, Messaoudene, this statistic that showed that 1 out of every 2 people in the Paris region has been stopped by police in the 6 weeks since the beginning of confinement. But the number of those actually who've been hit with summons is nearly 3 times higher in the area where you are than in the rest of the Paris region. Your thoughts?
Well, I'm not surprised. Since the beginning of the confinement, we have seen many police controls in the area. And we knew that there would be a lot of fines because many people are forced to be in the street because they are not able to respect the confinement as if they were living in the 7th district of Paris. So we have many people in small apartments. So we have many people in apartments that are not suitable for living for many people. So we saw a lot of police controls. We saw a lot of fines. And what we denounced since the beginning is that the government didn't take into account the specificity of the population here. And behind that, we also saw a lot of police violence in our neighbors. And the last one was 2 days ago with racist police and violence in ile-Saint-Denis, which is a city near Saint-Denis and Stains. So we are facing a very difficult situation here. And I don't talk about the sum mortality here in Saint-Denis or in other cities, and I don't talk also about people that are forced to work to make France not to collapse today.
All right, look, we're going to talk about the issues of that inquiry that's been opened into police brutality for what happened over the weekend. First, though, I want to go around the room, beginning with you, Madjid, and ask you. I know that this is a pre-record, so we'll be broadcast after you've had your very first city council meeting, which will be done virtually later today. What's confinement been like in Saint-Denis?
Well, in Saint-Denis, at the beginning, it was very respected because we didn't know how many time it would last. But since a few days, we see a lot of people outside, and I think there are some reasons for that. I mentioned some of them. Where I'm living, for example, I see many kids outside, and when I ask them why they're outside, they tell me that it's not possible to stay at home more time because it's difficult. And we see a lot of young guys outside because mainly when there are too many people in the apartment, because people can't go to work, because people can't go to study. The ones who are outside are mainly boys. So we can see a lot of people outside because it's very difficult to respect confinement here. As I said, as if they were living in big houses with gardens. So we have to take it into account. We cannot control here as if we were in the center of Paris. And what we know also is that police controls people that have no apartments, that are outside, that live in the street. So we assist to things that I don't really understand. But what I can say, what I can see every day is that the confinement is very difficult to respect day after day. And I think that what we are facing for the 11th of May as a return to school, back to school, it would be very difficult here.
Very difficult. We'll get back to that point. Ines Sediki, yeah, the French president has set this sort of deadline of May 11th when we're going to see a beginning of deconfinement. What's it been like, first of all, where you are in Stan?
Where I live in Stan, we have started seeing the consequences of the crisis very early, economically, but also socially, school-wise as well. I mean, a lot of kids don't have access to internet here, don't have computers or smartphones that could enable them to follow classes online. A lot of the parents also go to work, as we were talking about earlier. A lot of these people who are keeping the country together and working as delivery guys, as cashier people and stuff, they come from the suburbs. So the kids are at home alone all day, and they often don't have anyone to help them with school. And this is the first part.
It's on that point. We did a show 2 weeks ago, and I know, Ines, that your organization's in contact with groups in Harlem and New York City. We did a show in New York, and one sociologist was explaining to us, if you want to look at where the COVID-19 hotspots are in New York, well, it's where all those essential workers live, in working class neighborhoods. You're getting the sense it's the same where you are?
Exactly, and then as I was telling, the consequences are starting to show, because we are also facing like the economic crisis is starting to show, and the social crisis as well. So we already have problems with people who lost their jobs and cannot pay rent, or have to choose between rent and food. So the next step here in Saint-Denis is people who will not have access to food, not because of a lack of food, but because they won't have the means anymore to buy food, because they still have their rent, but they don't have their jobs anymore. So this is what we're gonna start and see here, and it's really problematic and worrying.
Fabien, Truong, in England where you are, they're a couple of weeks behind us when it comes to lockdown. We're almost on Tuesday, it'll be exactly 6 weeks here. And is it a question of social inequality that people aren't respecting as much the rules of lockdown? Or is it just that the population as a whole is getting stir crazy?
Yeah, I think, again, you have to really look at the social conditions of confinement, as you mentioned. And for example, to go back on what Madjid said, to understand how a household works, in Saint-Denis or in the banlieue, and most of the time, a household can function, in a normal day because there's a flux of people. Because, the key here is density, and households are highly dense. So the way it works is that the dad, the mom, the kids, they're never really at the same time in the house, and that's how you can function in a very small space with a lot of people. And obviously, with confinement, this is a big challenge in terms of how do you cope in terms of this flux. So again, this is a question of density, which makes it, and it's kind of even mechanical. Density means it's less easy to respect social confinement just because there's too many people. So that's something which is really important, which is the same thing with the police control. Obviously there's much more control and fine Saint-Denis or in the suburbs, as Madjid said, but you've got much more people. And you've got much more people who are forced to have this flux. Plus, as well, you have much more stop and search. You've got much more stop and search in the suburbs than in the bourgeois area of Paris, for example. And even this, mechanically speaking, it creates more fine and more figures saying that there's a lower respectment of confinement. But I think you would have to be very, very clever to even say that people in the suburb respect less confinement than in other places, because if you take into consideration density and more stop and search by the police, mechanically you would have those figures. So again, I think you really have to look at this sort of sociological picture to understand the figures that we're talking about.
Yeah, and we've seen since the beginning of the lockdown several instances where violence has sprung up, or certainly outrage. Madjid Messaoudene mentioning the latest this past weekend in a hamlet which is next door to where he is in ile-Saint-Denis. Police stopping somebody who tried to run away by going into the Seine. They fished him out, and on the way back, he's heard on audio tape, making on filmed with a phone. The police are heard making remarks that are racist, and we've had a reaction. I'll read it to you, Madjid, from the Interior Minister himself, saying there is a legitimate indignation after that video. All light will be shed upon it. Internal Affairs, the police of police, is looking into the case. Racism has no place in a Republican police. Your thoughts?
Well, my thoughts is that we hear that since many years, 20 or 30 years. They always say that racism is not appropriate in the police, but the police is racist since 30 or 40 years in working class neighbors. So the problem is that as long as the police will be investigating on the police, there won't be justice. And what people are asking for is justice. They want these policemen to have sanctions, to be revocated, to be away from these working class neighbors, because we know that a part of the police is racist, and when they can be violent because they have arms, it's very dangerous for the population in our neighbors. When we are running, when we see the police, it's not because we have something to hide. It's also because we fear, we are afraid, and they have to understand that what we saw 2 days ago is unacceptable. And I can bet right now that the policemen that are in cause now on this file, there won't be any sanctions for them, because we know that when the IGPN investigates, we know the results. I can spoil. It will be a white card for them for the next police violences. So it is just impossible for us to accept them anymore, and we can't. Just to finish on that, we can't send back to back the revolts that we've seen during many days in Villeneuve-la-Garenne, for example, with the police brutalities, because they are here to represent the state, to represent the law, and they are the ones that violate our basic rights.
Madjid Messaoudene, let's explain to our viewers. In Villeneuve-la-Garenne, which is the next town over, there was a man, a 30-year-old with a long police record. He's on a motorbike without a helmet. Police try to stop him, and one of the police allegedly opens a car door. He wound up in hospital. It provoked several nights of rioting, and he's issued an appeal for calm, but he's also said that he is suing the police. With both of those incidences back to back, don't you think there's going to be a little bit of soul searching?
Well, I don't know. I don't know what are going to be the next days. But what I know is that the population knows that the police violence is not confined. That the police took advantage of confinement to control more and more in our neighbors, and we can't accept that anymore. It's impossible to try to arrest someone by opening a door. He was about to lose his leg, so we can't live day and day with the fear of the police, and they have to be respectable if they want us to respect them.
Is it all the fault of the police? I mean, we've also highlighted, Madjid, how they've been working under difficult conditions since the start of lockdown, forced to go on the beat without masks or gloves.
Yeah. But yes, I agree. I don't say that the conditions of work of the police are good. I say that nothing can justify police brutality. If they have problems of working condition, they have to stop working. They don't have to beat us. They don't have to control us. They don't try to kill us. But the rule here is police.
Ines Sediki?
No, I say when you don't respect the confinement, you mustn't be fearing of losing your leg. There are fines for that. So I think the debate is not put in the right words here. I mean, there's no point in talking about the background of that young man who was hit by the car. I mean, who hit the car. It's not like one incident here and an incident that. It's a very structural problem, and I think that's what we have to understand with this crisis. I think the coronavirus crisis has really shed light on all the structural inequalities and everything that doesn't work in our societies, and it's actually the same. You talked about Harlem earlier. That really means that it's the structure of our societies that enables these inequalities and these problems to happen. So there's Villeneuve-la-Garenne and there's ile-Saint-Denis, but before that there were Les Ulysses and there was Aubervilliers. Since the start of the confinement, there were a lot of cases of police brutality filmed, spread on social media, and some of the victims never had to do anything with the police. So it's not about who they are and what they do and what they were there. It's really that there is a structural problem. And to go back on that very quickly.
What needs to be done, Ines? Tell us. What needs to be done on that score?
I mean, there needs to, everyone in this country needs to understand that there are no second-class citizens. Just to go back on the social and health crisis, one figure that can explain the reasons why we live this kind of situations today. In Saint-Denis, there are twice as much people dying in March 2020 as 2029 as in Paris. So the rise of death in March 2020 is 30% more in Paris, for example. So 30% more people die from coronavirus. In Saint-Denis, it's more than 60%, so twice as much. And that is explained by the fact that there are inequalities in access to health. 37 cities in Saint-Denis are considered medical deserts. That explains that,
Medical
the
desert.
state, yeah, medical deserts. So that means that the state has not lived up to the promise of the République. The République. What's the purpose of the République? It says that France doesn't see color, it doesn't see religion, it doesn't see anything. It only sees citizens. So a citizen of the Seine-Saint-Denis should have the same rights and the same access to public services as a citizen in Paris. And that's not the case. And that's what leads us to this situation today. And that's the core of the problem, and not like epiphenomens like this story here, that problem there. It's a very structural problem that
Republic left
we need to
us.
tackle.
Fabien, Truong, you could argue that this is a problem in France that's been going on since what, the 1980s, with irregularly riots in the working class suburbs, in the banlieue as they're called here. And yet we heard the French president say, our country depends on men and women who we pay so badly. We need to build a strategy of the long term. That's what Emmanuel Macron said 2 weeks ago. And it's true that so much has been made of the fact that people who, well, didn't notice the person at the checkout counter or the healthcare worker or the sanitation worker are perhaps going to have a different eye when all this is over. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with that, and totally agree with Ines when she says that basically this crisis shed lights on structural things and, social phenomena that were there before and maybe for some reason invisible. So, and now what you can see that the banlieue, all the banlieue around Paris, they are actually making Paris function in many ways. So, and we always have this sort of image of the banlieue, a ghetto, or confined places actually, which it's a place of flux. And again, for example, take the line 13, which is the line that takes you to Paris to Saint-Denis, for example.
The metro line.
Yeah, this metro line. And this is the crowdest metro line ever. And it's a really interesting exercise to take this metro line really early in the morning from Saint-Denis to Paris. And you will see that this line is already overcrowded with cleaners, with people working in transport, logistics, cashier, and so on and so forth. And so, again, the picture is a bit different. Now you can see in many ways that the banlieue are deeply economically connected to the center. And this is not a question of only Paris and, the Paris.
So is it a seminal moment? Is it a seminal moment for France, this? Because when we come out of confinement, will it all be forgotten?
But possibly, because now we've got this sort of narrative of the heroes, the ordinary heroes, we're clapping, and it's very symbolic, and it's kind of cheap. I think it's good that we celebrate all these people because they're obviously essentials, but I don't think these people even want to see themselves as heroes. They just want to be recognized for what they do, and recognition starts with a decent wage. And as well, maybe more consideration in the way they are treated overall and seen. And again, if you, I go back on the police thing, because maybe it's something that the international viewer might not understand, because it's very specific to France. In France, the police has the right to stop and search and to ask for your ID. And if you haven't got your ID on you, it's an offense, and you can be taken down. So you need to have your ID. And this is very specific to France. And that's one of the rationale of this stop and search, and this sort of a cat and dog game with the police and the youth in the suburbs is, we're asking you for your ID, and if you haven't got your ID, you're going to be in trouble. And this has been going on for years and years and years and years. And you have to understand that the reality for the youth of the suburbs, and especially the boys, is that every boy will have had a bad experience of stop and search and be caught in the moment where he hasn't got his ID and is going to end up at the police station. So that is an experience that is shared by everybody. So that's why as well, people fear of the police. It's not only like the issue of racism, which is an issue, but it's the idea that it's plausible, it's probable that you can go out as a boy and end up at the police station with an offense.
Fabien, you're in Britain, where you don't legally have to have your ID with you when you walk down the street. Nonetheless, Is the experience in working class neighborhoods the same as it is in France right now under lockdown?
Well, you have no issues with the police because the relationship between the police and the inhabitants is a bit different. So you haven't got the same issues, but the social issues are just the same. And if you look at England, I mean, you know, all the figures about the essential workers and the concentration of basically areas where people have less means of surviving at these crucial times. You see the higher rates of illness and death and so on and so forth. So it's exactly the same thing in that respect. So the sort of social picture of what I call a social part of the virus is very, very clear, and
is there enough? What's the media coverage been like on that score? Is this something that's been underlined?
Sorry?
What's the media coverage been like on that score? There's been criticism here in France that the tensions in the banlieue have been played down. What's it been like in the UK when it comes to covering that inequality?
Well, I think it's less covered as a whole, but I think it's more due to the relationship with England and its margin than, if you compare with France. I mean, to be honest, most of the news were about Boris Johnson. And, we know his social background. He's got a very specific social background, and he had a very specific intake on the virus, which, again, it's very, if you analyze it, it's quite telltale because he kind of felt he was indestructible in many ways, and that's something which is very social. And when you come from a more favored background, you kind of feel that you're more protected, and this is a true fact. You will be more protected, and I think there's as well a sort of a social relationship to the way you react to the virus. When you come from a more privileged background, you think you will be less it, and in many ways it's true because you've got better means, you've got better health, you have a better relationship with the medical institution, and so on and so forth, and you're less likely to die. That's a fact.
All right, let's look ahead. Ines Siddiqui, the near future, that date everyone's talking about, especially in areas where people don't live in giant mansions, but in tiny apartments, is May 11th. They're talking about how to reopen schools. It's the big debate this week in the French National Assembly. What should be done in terms of school? How much do you reopen schools, and what age group? What do you do?
There is a strong need of continuity for students who don't have access in their homes to internet, and they cannot follow school. So they have to be taken care of, especially those whose parents go to work and cannot be with them during the day. So there is this need to maintain a public service for schools, especially for the youngest ones. But there is also a real problem of means. Are we really going to be able to open schools? Is it really going to be safe for teachers? Like everything is really blurry right now. But what we know for sure is that the universities and the older folks will not be able to go to school before the end of the year, before September, October, and the schools that are supposed to be reopened are the middle schools and the schools where the kids really need to have adults to assist them.
How much longer can people in your neighborhood hold out while school remains shut?
We're still facing issues where like there are between 5 and 10% of students who are completely lost in the wild. Like teachers don't have any news from them. They don't know anything about them. They cannot get a hold of the parents as well. So we are still facing families who are really struggling with that. And also the school had also like a social aspect in which the kids, for some kids, the school meals were the only ones that were good enough and good enough for them, because at home they didn't have access to good food. So now we're seeing families where kids are starting to face difficulties eating well and eating enough, because the schools are closed. So there's a problem of education, but also of an economic problem for the parents who work, but also like a food problem for the family who were relying on school to feed the children.
Madjid Messaoudene, this is daunting what we just heard from Ines Sediki. It's a choice for some between eating properly and perhaps being exposed to the virus, or malnutrition almost. What do you do in that respect? How soon can we open those schools?
Well, what I've seen is this morning, as Dintabi, which is the mayor of Stein and the mayor of Ines, said that he was not able to open the schools on May 11th. Because she said, he doesn't have the means to do that. We can't open schools at all costs. And I think that many parents won't put their kids at school. All the parents that I've met in Saint-Denis since the beginning of the confinement and lately, all told me that they would boycott this date to be back to school, because they know that it will be difficult for the children to respect what we call les gestes barrières and social distanciation. It would be very difficult for them not to have contact with their friends and their teachers, etc. So I think that what do all the countries? To delay the new date to go back to school at September is something that I think is a better choice.
But then what do you do?
But we know.
Then what do you do, Madjid? What do you do with those 5 to 10% of kids that Ines was describing who've gone missing or gone walkabout, if you will, since the start of the lockdown?
I agree with Ines. Many kids are lost since the beginning of the confinement because they don't have the means to have a continuity in education. But this is an issue for the state. This is not an issue for the mayors. And I think that the state is responsible for that situation. And I think they didn't do what they should to make that continuity exist. But what we call social inequality and educational inequalities, they existed before the crisis. I just think that they have increased with the crisis. But all the problems we are facing now, we knew them before. Ines was talking about people about families that have difficulties to feed their children. We know many parents that are not able to feed their children properly. But I know what choice they will make. They will prefer to keep their children at home and try to give them the best education and the best food possible, better than send them to school and risk to their children to be contaminated.
Do you think, Madjid Messaoudene, that? Sorry, go ahead, Ines.
No, I mean, if I could put in this way, I mean, the state has to make sure that reopening schools will benefit the population more than the economy, because rushing into opening schools for parents to go back to work and other economic reasons can really be a risk and a danger for society. And so when the government wants to reopen schools and they say it's for school continuity, they really have to make sure that it's going to be for that and not just for the economy. Because as we were talking earlier about the lessons of this crisis, we faced the same problematics in 2008 with the crisis, and we chose to revive the economy more than the people. So what we have to try and do now is to take into account that the safety nets and the safety of the people and the citizens of the country is as much important as the economy.
But
And
we know
that's
what
I wanted to say.
Just a word on that. Your organization, you work with teenagers and put them in contact with kids from other parts of the world, for instance. How's it going for you? At a social distance, keeping contact with those kids, and I don't know, doing Zoom calls. How's it working?
So basically, we what we try to do is help the kids we have in our programs maintain the contact with school. So we work with the foundations we work with, and we try to equip them with computers and access to internet. That was our main focus for the last 2 weeks, and then we realized that more than having a computer and internet, these kids couldn't really use all the softwares and the tools and really make the most of these online platforms that were created for that. And so we are trying to shift to helping them master all these tools and be able to maintain the contact with school and maintain their studies. And a lot of the so that's for middle schoolers, for example, but we also have in our networks and our programs students in universities and higher studies who lost their job, lost their internships, still have to pay rent. So we are working with Article 1, which is another organization in France, to work on an emergency fund to help these students who are losing everything week after week.
And are you in contact with the government? How's it looking?
Basically, it's raising money from companies, from the government, from everyone who can help to maintain these students in their houses, to help them still feed themselves and be able to pursue their studies, because a lot of them also come from everywhere, in France, and they arrive in Paris, and their internships are gone. Their student jobs are shut down, and they still have to pay the charges, and they still have to, continue working and learning, which is really, really hard.
So one of the inequalities, Fabien Truong, that's been highlighted by this crisis is digital inequalities. We've just heard from Ines. Do you think this could be a seminal moment where that digital inequality can be reduced, or is it just going to widen?
Yeah, well, I think obviously the digital gap is a big thing, but I mean, if you really talk about education, you will never replace a human relationship. And if you take the sanitary question apart, now the saying is that, we need only one teacher for 15 students because of the sanitary reason. But I must say that in the suburbs, that's what we need. That's basically the dream of every teacher, is to only have 15 pupils, because there's so many, those kids need a bit more attention than kids who are already ready to jump into books and, all the what school is waiting for you. So, if we take all those things apart and we're thinking, okay, from a social point of view, 15 students per teacher, that would be a great way to restart afresh. But obviously, would need much more teacher, much more means in education. But I mean,
would it be okay to do that with half days, for instance, where you could split a classroom in two?
Well, we're talking about managing a crisis at the moment. I'm talking about having a bigger perspective on that. So, it would be difficult to because you can't exclude half of the class from the classroom. So I guess half days and half days might be fair. But if you take it from a bigger perspective, I think a good lesson that could be learned from this is that to ensure what we call the pedagogical continuity. It's a French way of saying, carry on with the education. Limited of numbers for one teacher. That's what we need, and maybe we could learn from this, and because we will see the effect if it's effectively put in place. Because it's much more easier to do the work and to do the job with less students, and that's what we need.
Final word on this, Madjid Messaoudene, because we're almost out of time. That was one of Emmanuel Macron's campaign promises: smaller classrooms in areas where it's needed most, especially at the primary education level. Again, will this crisis be an opportunity?
Well, I don't believe anymore the promises of Emmanuel Macron. We've seen classes with less less children, but we've also seen, classes without teachers. So I want to see the results of his promises, and I want to see teachers well formed, with experience, and I want our neighbors, our cities to be respected at last. And it's not the case today, and it was not the case 30 and 20 and 10 years ago.
What's the one measure you would install to, again, turn this crisis into an opportunity?
One measure? One measure, I want the Republic to come back in our neighbors. I want the Republic to come back. I want the public services to come back. And I want, as Ines said before, I want the president and I want the state to consider us as first-class citizens, as other citizens in the country, and not second-class citizens.
Madjid Messaoudene, I want to thank you so much for joining us from Saint-Denis. I want to thank Ines Sediki for being with us from nearby Stains in the northern suburbs of Paris. Fabien Truong, who's with us today from southeast England. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for joining us more and more online on Facebook, Twitter, and by subscribing to our YouTube channel. There's more news on France24.com.